A week before Christmas, I discovered my family planned to humiliate me in front of everyone and then cut me off completely. So, I made my own plans. On December 24th, when my mother called asking, "Where are you?" "Everyone's waiting," I smiled and told her not to hold dinner for me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I am Natalie, 26 years old, and Christmas used to mean everything to me. Growing up in the Westfield family of Riverside Heights meant picture-perfect holidays, but as the daughter who chose photography over law school, I had always been swimming upstream. Last December, I arrived 3 days early to help with preparations when I overheard a conversation that shattered my entire world. My own family was orchestrating a public intervention to force me to abandon my photography business, complete with a fake emergency designed to make me look unstable in front of our extended family. The Westfields of Riverside Heights were known throughout the community for three things: political influence, generational wealth, and an obsession with maintaining their pristine reputation. My father, Richard Westfield, had built his law firm into one of the most powerful practices in the state. The kind of success story that graced magazine covers and political fundraising dinners. My mother, Catherine, came from a family of judges and prosecutors, serving on museum boards and charity committees that shaped the cultural landscape of our affluent suburb. Then there were my siblings, who had followed the predetermined path with mathematical precision. My older brother, Jonathan, 29, had seamlessly transitioned from Harvard Law to a partnership track at a prestigious firm downtown. My younger sister, Allison, 24, was completing her final year at Yale Law School, already fielding offers from firms that most graduates could only dream of joining. She had been featured in the university's promotional materials as a rising star in environmental law. And then there was me, Natalie Westfield, the anomaly who was supposed to complete the family's legal dynasty but instead became their most carefully hidden disappointment. The plan for my life had been mapped out before I could walk: top-tier university, law degree, join either the family firm or establish my own practice prestigious enough to enhance the Westfield brand. I had dutifully followed the script through my undergraduate years at Princeton. But during my junior year abroad in Italy, something fundamental shifted. While my classmates spent their weekends at wine tastings and tourist attractions, I found myself wandering through ancient streets with my camera, capturing moments of raw human emotion that no textbook had ever taught me to see. The play of light across weathered faces, the stories told in shadows and expressions, the way a single photograph could preserve an entire universe of feeling. By senior year, instead of preparing for law school entrance exams, I was building a portfolio and studying the work of legendary photographers. The family reaction was swift and devastating. My father stopped speaking to me for 2 months. My mother scheduled intervention meetings with family friends who were partners at top firms. My siblings alternated between awkward silence and lectures about throwing away my potential and embarrassing the family name. Despite their mounting pressure, I graduated and used my savings to rent a small studio apartment in the arts district of downtown Riverside Heights. I survived on instant meals and freelance portrait sessions, working 18-hour days to build Westfield photography from absolutely nothing. 3 years later, my work was being featured in regional magazines. I had photographed 2 high-profile weddings that made the society pages, and I was earning enough to live comfortably doing what I genuinely loved. Not that my family acknowledged any of this as legitimate success. At every family gathering, the conversation about my career followed the same painful script. My mother would sigh dramatically and ask, "So you're still doing that photography hobby?" My father would follow with his standard response, "When you're ready to pursue a real career, my door is always open." Jonathan would offer to review my business finances as though I was playing pretend rather than running an actual company. Allison would forward me job listings for paralegal positions, as if my Princeton degree and 3 years of business experience counted for nothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Christmas at the Westfield estate was an elaborate production designed to showcase our family's success to the community's elite. Our Georgian mansion, with its 6 bedrooms and grand ballroom, was transformed each December into something worthy of architectural magazines. Professional decorators created themed displays that changed annually, and my mother coordinated every detail with the precision of a military operation. The guest list read like a who's who of local politics, business, and high society. Conversations revolved around judicial appointments, corporate mergers, and which Ivy League schools were recruiting which promising young people. In this environment, my modest photography business might as well have been a lemonade stand operated by a child. Yet every year, I tried desperately to prove my worth. I invested in expensive clothes I could barely afford to fit their dress code. I prepared eloquent explanations of my business that emphasized commercial success over artistic passion. I brought professionally printed portfolios of my best work, hoping someone might finally see the skill and dedication involved. I created personalized photo gifts that usually ended up stored in closets somewhere. This particular Christmas held special significance for my parents. My mother's sister was visiting from Boston with her family, including my cousin Rebecca, who had just been promoted to senior associate at a prominent firm. My father's law school roommate, now a federal judge, was flying in with his wife. Several family friends who served on various boards and committees had confirmed their attendance. When my mother called in November about the gathering, I heard a note of genuine excitement in her voice that I hadn't heard directed toward me in years. "Natalie, this will be our most important Christmas celebration yet. Judge Harrison will be here, along with the Pemberton family and the Morrison clan. We need to present ourselves as the successful, united family we are." That tiny hint of inclusion, that suggestion that I might finally be considered part of their definition of success, made me throw myself into preparation with renewed determination. I spent weeks planning a special photography exhibition for the family gathering, showcasing my best work from the past year. I had matted and framed pieces that demonstrated the range and sophistication of my portfolio, corporate headshots that had helped executives land major deals, wedding photos that captured once-in-a-lifetime moments, and artistic portraits that revealed the deeper humanity in ordinary people. I invested in new business cards with premium cardstock and foil printing that would impress even the Westfield standards. I researched each guest who would be attending, hoping to make meaningful connections that might lead to new opportunities. Maybe this would finally be the Christmas when they saw my work as legitimate. Maybe this would be the year I earned my place at their table not as the family disappointment, but as a successful entrepreneur in my own right. 3 days before Christmas, I loaded my car with camera equipment, framed photographs, and carefully wrapped gifts I had created for each family member. As I drove through the tree-lined streets of Riverside Heights toward the family estate, I felt cautiously optimistic that this visit might mark a turning point in my relationship with my family. I had no idea that this Christmas would completely transform my understanding of family, success, and my own worth in ways I never could have imagined. The Westfield family had ruled the legal and political landscape of Riverside Heights for 3 generations. Our family portrait hung in the courthouse lobby, and our name appeared on plaques throughout the city's most prestigious institutions. This wasn't just wealth, it was legacy, power, and an unshakable belief that we were somehow more important than everyone else. My earliest memories are of being groomed for this world. While other children played with toys, I was taught to shake hands properly and make eye contact during conversations with adults. By age 7, I could recite the names of every Supreme Court justice and explain the basic structure of our legal system. Family dinners weren't casual affairs but training sessions where we practiced articulating complex arguments and defending our positions under scrutiny. My grandfather, Judge Harold Westfield, had established the family's reputation in the 1960s with a series of high-profile cases that shaped state law. His photograph dominated my father's office, and his ghost seemed to preside over every family decision. The expectation wasn't just that we would succeed, it was that we would exceed his achievements and cement the Westfield name in legal history. My father took this responsibility seriously, perhaps too seriously. Richard Westfield had spent his entire adult life building upon his father's foundation, working 18-hour days and sacrificing personal relationships for professional advancement. His law firm, Westfield and Associates, employed over 40 attorneys and handled cases for major corporations, wealthy individuals, and political figures throughout the region. He measured success in billable hours, case victories, and social connections that could open doors for future opportunities. I remember him missing school plays, birthday parties, and family vacations because a case demanded his attention. When he was present, conversations inevitably turned to legal precedents, political strategies, or business developments that might impact our family's standing in the community. My mother, Catherine, approached family management like a corporate executive. She maintained detailed calendars tracking our academic achievements, extracurricular activities, and social obligations. Her day began at 5:30 a.m. with phone calls to coordinate charity events, museum fundraisers, and political campaigns that kept the Westfield name visible in all the right circles. She had abandoned her own legal career after marriage, channeling her ambition into making her children reflections of family excellence. Our report cards were analyzed like quarterly earnings reports. Our college applications were treated as marketing campaigns. Our career choices were evaluated based on their potential to enhance or damage the family brand. Jonathan, my older brother, had internalized these expectations so completely that pursuing law felt like his natural calling rather than family pressure. He genuinely enjoyed legal research, thrived in competitive academic environments, and seemed born to navigate the political complexities of major law firms. His success validated my parents' approach and created an impossible standard for the rest of us to match. Watching Jonathan receive praise for achievements that aligned perfectly with family expectations, I spent my childhood trying to find my own version of that approval. I excelled academically, participated in debate teams, and volunteered for political campaigns, hoping to discover some spark of passion for the legal world that seemed to define our family's identity. But even as I succeeded in these prescribed activities, something felt fundamentally wrong. The competitive atmosphere of debate tournaments left me feeling hollow rather than energized. Legal case studies seemed like abstract puzzles disconnected from real human experiences. Political events felt like elaborate performances where everyone spoke in carefully rehearsed talking points. Allison, my younger sister, had found her own way to excel within the family framework. Her focus on environmental law allowed her to satisfy my parents' expectations while pursuing something that felt personally meaningful. She had managed to balance family loyalty with individual passion, making my own struggles feel even more isolating. During high school, I discovered that my only moments of genuine happiness came during photography class, an elective I had chosen almost by accident. While my classmates complained about having to learn manual camera settings and composition techniques, I found myself staying after school to experiment with different lighting situations and developing processes. My photography teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, was the first adult who seemed to see something valuable in me that had nothing to do with academic achievement or family expectations. He encouraged me to enter local competitions and helped me build a portfolio that earned recognition from regional art organizations. For the first time, I was receiving praise for work that felt authentically mine rather than an attempt to meet someone else's standards. My parents' reaction to these early artistic successes was politely dismissive. They attended my photography exhibitions with the same dutiful expression they wore at Jonathan's academic award ceremonies, but their conversations afterward focused on how this hobby might enhance my law school applications rather than celebrating the work itself. Natalie's artistic eye will serve her well in legal presentations, my mother would tell friends, transforming my creative achievements into evidence of future legal success. Visual communication skills are increasingly important in modern courtrooms, my father would add, as though my photographs were merely practice for creating legal exhibits. This pattern continued throughout high school and college. Every attempt to pursue photography more seriously was redirected toward its potential legal applications. Every conversation about my artistic goals was reframed as preparation for my inevitable legal career. Every achievement in creative fields was celebrated only insofar as it might distinguish me from other law school applicants. The family's social circle reinforced these expectations at every gathering. Conversations at dinner parties, charity events, and holiday celebrations revolved around legal careers, political developments, and business opportunities. Children were evaluated based on their academic achievements and career prospects. Success was measured by prestige, income, and social influence rather than personal fulfillment or creative expression. I watched my parents' friends discuss their children like investment portfolios, tracking their progress through elite universities and competitive internships. The language they used was revealing. Children were described as performing well or disappointing, based entirely on their adherence to predetermined paths toward conventional success. In this environment, my growing passion for photography felt like a dangerous secret. I learned to downplay my artistic interests and emphasize the technical aspects that might appeal to my family's rational sensibilities. I spoke about photography in business terms, discussing client management and revenue potential rather than creative vision or emotional impact. But privately, I was developing a completely different understanding of success and fulfillment. Photography taught me to notice details that others overlooked, to find beauty in ordinary moments, and to connect with people in ways that had nothing to do with social status or professional achievement. Through my camera lens, I discovered a world where authenticity mattered more than appearance, where individual stories were more compelling than institutional prestige. This growing awareness created an internal conflict that intensified throughout my college years. I was living two separate lives, the public version that satisfied family expectations and the private version where I explored my true interests and values. The gap between these two identities widened each year, creating stress that affected my academic performance, personal relationships, and mental health. By my senior year, the contradiction had become unsustainable. I could no longer pretend that law school represented my genuine aspirations, nor could I continue hiding my artistic ambitions from my family. The choice between family approval and personal authenticity was becoming impossible to avoid, setting the stage for the confrontation that would define my adult relationship with the people I loved most. The year I graduated from Princeton, the pressure reached a breaking point that nearly destroyed my relationship with photography entirely. My parents had arranged a summer internship at Pemberton, Hayes & Associates, one of the most prestigious corporate law firms in the state. The position was supposed to be my introduction to serious legal work, a stepping stone toward law school applications that fall. I spent those 3 months in a sterile office tower, researching case precedents and formatting legal documents that felt completely disconnected from anything that mattered to me. My supervisor, a senior associate named Thomas Kellerman, treated the internship like an extended job interview, constantly evaluating my commitment to legal career advancement. He made it clear that my performance would be reported back to my parents and could influence my recommendations for law school. Every morning, I put on conservative business attire and took the elevator to the 32nd floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the city skyline. But instead of feeling inspired by the success this environment represented, I felt trapped. The work was intellectually challenging but emotionally empty. The long hours left me exhausted and creatively starved. The competitive atmosphere among interns felt toxic and dehumanizing. During lunch breaks, I would escape to the building's outdoor plaza with my camera, stealing 30 minutes to photograph the interplay of shadows and light on the concrete surfaces around me. These brief moments were the only times I felt like myself during those endless summer weeks. I was documenting my own imprisonment, creating a visual diary of what it felt like to live someone else's life. The crisis came during my final week at the firm. Mr. Kellerman called me into his office to discuss my performance evaluation and future prospects. He had clearly been pleased with my work and began outlining opportunities for me to return as a law school intern the following summer. As he spoke about partnership tracks and career advancement, I found myself staring out his window at a construction worker on a building across the street. The worker was taking a break, sitting on a steel beam hundreds of feet above the ground, eating a sandwich and looking completely at peace with his dangerous, demanding job. In that moment, I realized I envied his contentment more than I admired anything about the legal career being offered to me. The recognition hit me like physical pain. I was actively participating in the destruction of my own dreams. That evening, I called my college photography professor, Dr. Angela Morrison, who had become an informal mentor during my final semester. I broke down completely, sobbing into the phone about feeling lost and trapped by expectations I had never chosen for myself. She listened patiently before offering the perspective that changed everything. "Natalie, you can't build an authentic life on a foundation of other people's dreams." Her words crystallized something I had been struggling to articulate for years. I wasn't just disappointing my family by pursuing photography, I was betraying myself by continuing to pretend that law represented my genuine aspirations. The internal conflict was eating away at my mental health, my creativity, and my ability to form meaningful relationships. Dr. Morrison suggested I take a gap year before making any decisions about law school, using the time to seriously explore photography as more than just a hobby. She offered to connect me with working photographers who could provide realistic insight into the profession's challenges and opportunities. For the first time in months, I felt a spark of hope about my future. Convincing my parents to support a gap year required weeks of careful negotiation and strategic compromising. I presented it as an opportunity to strengthen my law school applications by gaining diverse life experience and developing visual communication skills that would set me apart from other candidates. I promised to spend the year working in law-adjacent fields while exploring photography as a supplementary skill set. They agreed reluctantly, with strict conditions: would live at home to save money, take the LSAT in the fall, and apply to law schools by December. The gap year was framed as preparation for legal study, not exploration of alternative careers. Any photography activities had to be positioned as resume-building exercises rather than serious artistic pursuits. I spent that year living a carefully orchestrated double life. During the day, I worked as a paralegal at a small firm that handled personal injury cases, gaining experience that satisfied my parents' expectations. The work was more engaging than my corporate internship because it involved real people facing genuine crises, but it still felt like playing a role rather than pursuing my authentic interests. Evenings and weekends belonged to photography. I assisted established photographers at weddings and corporate events, learning the business side of creative work while developing technical skills. I started building a portfolio of portraits that captured something essential about each subject, developing a style that balanced artistic vision with commercial viability. The contradiction between these two worlds was exhausting but educational. Working in law showed me exactly what I would be choosing if I followed family expectations: financial security, social prestige, and intellectual challenge, but also long hours, high stress, and work that felt disconnected from my core values. Photography offered creative fulfillment, meaningful connections with clients, and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful, but also financial uncertainty, irregular income, and constant pressure to justify my choices. During family gatherings that year, I became skilled at presenting my photography work in terms my parents could understand and appreciate. I emphasized the technical complexity of lighting and composition, the problem-solving aspects of difficult shoots, and the client management skills required to run a successful business. I learned to speak about creativity in the language of commerce and strategy. This translation process was emotionally draining but strategically necessary. I was buying time to develop my skills and build a portfolio while maintaining family relationships that I valued despite their conditional nature. I knew that eventually I would have to choose between authenticity and approval, but I wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. The turning point came during a wedding shoot in late spring. I was photographing the ceremony when I caught a moment between the bride's grandparents during the processional. The grandfather was helping his wife stand as their granddaughter walked down the aisle, and their faces showed such profound love and pride that several guests began crying when they saw my image displayed later at the reception. The bride's mother approached me afterward with tears in her eyes, saying that I had captured the exact feeling she had hoped to preserve from that day. She asked for additional prints to share with extended family and recommended my services to 3 other couples planning weddings. In that moment, I understood that photography wasn't just what I wanted to do, it was what I was meant to do. But translating this certainty into action required confronting the reality of family disappointment and social pressure that had shaped my entire life. I began researching photography programs and business development resources, preparing for the conversation that would either liberate me or destroy my relationship with my family. The LSAT results arrived in November, showing scores that would qualify me for admission to prestigious law schools. My parents celebrated as though this confirmed that their patience with my gap year had been justified. They began discussing application strategies and campus visits, assuming that my brief experiment with photography had satisfied my artistic curiosity. I spent the following month attending law school information sessions and meeting with admissions counselors, playing the role of an enthusiastic prospective student while internally preparing for the most difficult conversation of my life. Each campus visit reinforced my certainty that legal education would be an expensive mistake that would lead me further away from the work I actually wanted to pursue. The deadline for law school applications created artificial urgency that forced my decision. I could no longer delay choosing between the life my family expected and the life I actually wanted. The stress of maintaining this deception was affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my ability to focus on either legal work or photography projects. On December 1st, instead of submitting law school applications, I enrolled in a professional photography program and registered my business with the State Licensing Bureau. I spent 2 weeks developing a business plan and portfolio presentation that would demonstrate the viability of photography as a legitimate career choice. I was preparing to fight for my dreams, knowing that the battle might cost me my family's support and approval. The conversation I had been dreading for over a year was about to become unavoidable, and I still had no idea whether my family would ever be able to accept the choice I was finally ready to make. I arrived at the family estate on December 21st, 3 days before Christmas Eve, with my car loaded with photography equipment and carefully wrapped gifts I had created for each family member. The house was already transformed into its annual holiday showcase, with professional lighting illuminating every architectural detail and massive wreaths adorning each window. A team of landscapers was installing the final touches on an elaborate outdoor display that would be featured in the local society magazine. My stomach churned with nervous energy as I pulled into the circular driveway. This would be the Christmas where I finally told my family about my decision to pursue photography full-time. I had spent weeks rehearsing different versions of the conversation, preparing business projections and portfolio presentations that might help them understand this wasn't just artistic rebellion but a legitimate career choice. The housekeeper, Carmen, greeted me at the front door with her usual warm smile. Unlike my family, Carmen had always shown genuine interest in my photography work, even asking me to take family portraits for her daughter's graduation. "Miss Natalie, so wonderful to see you," she said, helping me with my bags. "Your parents are in the library with your brother and some gentlemen I don't recognize. They've been in there for over an hour." I thanked Carmen and headed upstairs to settle into my childhood bedroom, which had been preserved like a museum exhibit of my pre-photography life. Academic awards lined the walls alongside debate team trophies and honor society certificates. My old bookshelf held legal textbooks and political biographies rather than the photography books that now filled my apartment. Everything in this room represented the version of myself my family wanted me to remain. After unpacking, I decided to find my parents and let them know I had arrived safely. As I approached the library, I could hear multiple voices engaged in what sounded like an intense planning session. I was about to knock when I heard my name mentioned, followed by words that made my blood run cold. "Natalie's photography delusion has gone on long enough," my father's voice declared with the same authority he used in courtroom arguments. "This intervention needs to happen publicly so she understands the severity of her poor judgment." I froze, my hand suspended inches from the library door. Through the partially open entrance, I could see my father standing behind his massive oak desk, with Jonathan seated in one of the leather chairs facing him. A third man I didn't recognize sat with his back to me, taking notes on a legal pad. "Dr. Harrison has agreed to participate," my mother's voice joined the conversation. I realized she must have entered through the library's side door. Having a psychiatrist present will add medical authority to our concerns about Natalie's mental state and decision-making capacity. My heart began pounding so hard I was certain they would hear it. I carefully positioned myself against the wall beside the door, out of sight but close enough to hear every word clearly. "What exactly will Dr. Harrison's role be?" the unfamiliar voice asked. I assumed this must be the man taking notes. "He'll present the psychological profile we discussed," Jonathan explained, his voice carrying the same clinical detachment he used when analyzing legal cases. "The pattern of impulsive decisions, unrealistic career expectations, and rejection of family guidance suggests underlying emotional instability that requires professional intervention." The violation of hearing my own brother diagnose me with mental illness felt like a physical blow. These people who claimed to love me were constructing a narrative of psychological dysfunction to explain away my career choice. "The timing is perfect," my mother continued, her voice shifting into the organizational tone she used when planning charity galas. "Christmas dinner will provide the ideal setting. With Judge Harrison, the Pemberton family, and the Morrison clan present, Natalie will feel appropriate pressure to accept our guidance. Having respected community members witness her behavior will make denial impossible." They had turned my family's Christmas celebration into a staged intervention designed to humiliate me in front of the most influential people in our social circle. The guest list I had been so excited about was actually an audience for my public breakdown. "What's the specific plan for the dinner presentation?" the note-taking man asked. "Richard will begin by expressing our family's concern for Natalie's future," my mother explained methodically. Then Jonathan will present the financial analysis showing the impossibility of sustainable income from photography work. Dr. Harrison will follow with his psychological assessment, and finally, Mr. Pemberton will offer Natalie a position at his firm as a face-saving alternative to continued artistic pursuits. The scope of their planning was breathtaking. They had recruited a psychiatrist to pathologize my career choice, prepared financial projections to demonstrate my incompetence, and arranged a job offer that would appear generous while being fundamentally controlling. "And if she refuses the intervention?" the stranger asked. A heavy silence followed before my father spoke with cold finality. "Then we make it clear that our financial and emotional support ends completely. Her trust fund access will be revoked, her name will be removed from family legal documents, and she'll be expected to find her own housing immediately after the holidays." I had to grip the wall to keep from collapsing. The trust fund they were threatening to revoke was money my grandfather had specifically designated for my education and early career development. Legally, they couldn't touch it, but their threat revealed how far they were willing to go to control my choices. "While she's processing this news at dinner," my mother added, "Carmen will be packing up her childhood belongings. We've decided to convert her bedroom into a home office for Richard's expanding practice. It's time Natalie understood that her place in this family depends on her willingness to make responsible adult decisions." They were planning to erase my presence from the family home while I sat through their public humiliation. Every memento, journal, and keepsake from my childhood would be boxed up and removed while I pretended to enjoy Christmas dinner with the people who were systematically destroying my sense of belonging. "The photography equipment in her car should probably be confiscated," Jonathan suggested with the same matter-of-fact tone he might use to discuss evidence in a legal case. Having those cameras available might encourage her to maintain this fantasy rather than facing reality. "Agreed," my father replied. "We'll have David move her car to the garage after she goes to bed tonight. When she asks about it tomorrow, we'll explain that we're protecting her from making additional poor investments in equipment she won't need once she accepts the position at Pemberton's firm." They were planning to steal my photography equipment, the tools I had spent 3 years collecting and learning to use professionally. These weren't just expensive cameras and lenses, they represented every small success, every satisfied client, every moment of creative breakthrough that had led me to this career choice. "I still think this approach seems unnecessarily harsh," a new voice interjected. I recognized my Uncle Marcus, my father's younger brother, who had apparently been present but silent until now. "Natalie's photography work isn't amateur level anymore. She's been getting real clients and positive reviews. Maybe there's a way to support her artistic interests while still encouraging more traditional career security." "Marcus, you're being naive," my mother responded sharply. "We've tried gentle encouragement for 3 years. Natalie has interpreted our patience as permission to continue this expensive hobby indefinitely. Sometimes tough love requires clear consequences. The longer we enable this behavior," my father added, "the harder it will be for her to recover from the financial and professional damage she's creating. At 26, she's already behind her peers in establishing a legitimate career foundation. Every additional month we delay intervention makes her eventual transition more difficult." "What about her happiness?" Uncle Marcus persisted. "I've seen some of her photographs, and they're genuinely impressive. She seems fulfilled by this work in a way I never saw during her law internships. Happiness is a luxury she can afford once she's established financial security," my mother replied coldly. "Artistic fulfillment doesn't pay mortgages or provide health insurance or retirement savings. We'd be failing as parents if we allowed her to build her life on such an unstable foundation." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with various participants refining the details of their intervention strategy. They discussed the specific wording they would use to present my career choice as mental illness, the documentation they had gathered about photography industry challenges, and backup plans if I attempted to leave the dinner before their presentation concluded. Every word felt like a knife cutting away at years of trying to earn their approval and maintain family relationships despite our fundamental differences. I had known they disapproved of my career choice, but I had never imagined they would go to such elaborate lengths to force me back into their prescribed path. As the meeting finally concluded and I heard chairs being pushed back from the table, I quietly retreated down the hallway to my bedroom. I closed the door behind me and sank onto my childhood bed, surrounded by reminders of the person they wanted me to remain forever. The beautiful photography gifts I had created for each family member sat in their custom boxes on my dresser, each one representing hours of work and thought and love that they would never appreciate or understand. The business plan I had prepared to share my professional goals now seemed like naive optimism in the face of their calculated cruelty. For the first time, I saw my family's treatment of me with perfect clarity. This wasn't misguided concern or tough love. This was manipulation, control, and a fundamental lack of respect for my autonomy as an adult. They weren't trying to help me succeed, they were trying to force me back into a version of success that served their reputation rather than my well-being. I sat in that room for hours, processing the devastating realization that the people I loved most in the world were willing to publicly humiliate me, steal my property, and cut me off financially rather than accept that I might know what was best for my own life. By the time I finally fell asleep, I had made a decision that would change everything. I would not be attending their intervention dinner. I would not be participating in my own destruction. And I would not be giving them another opportunity to treat me as a problem to be solved rather than a person to be respected. I woke up the next morning with swollen eyes and a headache that felt like my skull was being compressed in a vice. The conversation I had overheard played on repeat in my mind, each word more devastating than the last. For several minutes, I lay in bed hoping it had been a nightmare, but the legal pad I had used to jot down key phrases sat on my nightstand as undeniable proof. The house was quiet when I crept downstairs around 7 a.m., hoping to avoid family members until I could process what I had learned. Carmen was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, and her concerned expression told me that my emotional state was written clearly across my face. "Miss Natalie, are you feeling all right? You look like you didn't sleep well," she said, setting down her coffee cup and studying me with motherly concern. I managed a weak smile, not trusting myself to speak without breaking down completely. Carmen had worked for our family for over 15 years, and I suspected she had witnessed enough family dynamics to understand more than she ever said aloud. Her kindness in that moment nearly undid what little composure I had managed to gather. "Just some pre-Christmas nerves," I lied, pouring myself coffee with shaking hands. "You know how these big family gatherings can be stressful." She nodded knowingly but continued watching me with obvious worry. "If you need to talk to someone who understands family complications, I'm here," she offered quietly. "Sometimes an outside perspective can help clarify difficult situations." Her words were so gentle and perceptive that I had to excuse myself before I started crying in the kitchen. I took my coffee and escaped to the conservatory, a glass-enclosed room filled with my mother's orchids that offered privacy and natural light for thinking. Sitting among the exotic flowers that required such careful cultivation to survive, I tried to make sense of what my family was planning to do to me. The scope of their deception was staggering. They had spent weeks, possibly months, coordinating with outside professionals to construct a case against my career choice. They had researched my finances, consulted with a psychiatrist, and arranged job alternatives without involving me in any part of the process. What hurt most wasn't just the planned humiliation, but the fundamental assumption underlying their entire approach, that I was incapable of making rational decisions about my own life. They weren't planning an intervention to help me solve problems, they were planning an intervention to override my autonomy as an adult because they disagreed with my choices. I pulled out my phone and called the one person who had consistently supported my photography career without reservation. Dr. Morrison answered on the second ring, and I immediately broke down completely. "Natalie? What's wrong?" "Talk to me," she said, her voice shifting immediately into the caring tone that had helped me through so many academic and personal crises during college. Between sobs, I explained everything I had overheard, from the planned dinner presentation to the threats about my trust fund and housing. Dr. Morrison listened without interrupting, occasionally making sympathetic sounds that let me know she was fully present and engaged. "Oh, sweetheart," she said when I finished. "That's not an intervention. That's emotional abuse disguised as family concern. What they're planning is designed to break down your confidence and force compliance, not to support your well-being." Her immediate validation that my reaction wasn't an over-response felt like a lifeline. For a moment, I had wondered whether I was being too sensitive or dramatic, but hearing a respected mentor confirm that their behavior was inappropriate helped me trust my own perceptions. But what if they're right about the financial risks? I asked, voicing the doubt that had been gnawing at me since the previous night. What if I am being unrealistic about photography as a sustainable career? Natalie, I've seen your business development over the past 3 years, Dr. Morrison replied firmly. You're not playing at being a photographer anymore. You have consistent clients, positive reviews, and growing revenue. Yes, creative careers involve uncertainty, but so do traditional careers in our current economy. The difference is that you're building something aligned with your values and talents. She was right, but years of family messaging about practical versus artistic career choices had created deep insecurities that were difficult to overcome. Every small business challenge felt like evidence that my family might be correct about my poor judgment. What they're really afraid of, Dr. Morrison continued, isn't your financial security. It's losing control over your narrative. Your success as a photographer challenges their definition of acceptable achievement and threatens their ability to predict and manage your life choices. This perspective had never occurred to me, but it explained why their reaction to my career had been so intense and personal. My choice to pursue photography wasn't just disappointing to them, it was threatening to their entire worldview about how success should look and feel. I don't know what to do, I admitted. If I stay for Christmas dinner, I'll be walking into their trap. But if I leave, I'll probably lose my relationship with them permanently. And despite everything, I still love them. Love doesn't require you to participate in your own destruction, Dr. Morrison said gently. You can love your family while also protecting yourself from their harmful behavior. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable patterns that damage everyone involved. We talked for another hour about practical options and emotional strategies for handling the situation. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that my family's planned intervention was a symptom of deeper dysfunction that had been developing for years. Their inability to accept my career choice revealed problems with control, respect, and unconditional love that went far beyond disagreement about professional paths. After hanging up, I felt clearer about my situation but still uncertain about the best response. I spent the rest of the morning walking through downtown Riverside Heights, trying to process my emotions while avoiding my family. The familiar streets of my childhood looked different now, like a movie set rather than a real place where I belonged. Around noon, I found myself sitting in Central Park, the small green space where I had played as a child and later brought my first camera to practice composition techniques. The contrast between those innocent early memories and my current crisis felt surreal. I had once felt so secure in my family's love, so certain of my place in their world. My phone buzzed with a text from Jonathan. Mom wants to know if you'll be joining us for lunch. She's planning the seating chart for Christmas Eve dinner and needs to confirm your attendance. The casualness of his message, as though nothing had changed since yesterday, felt like a slap. He had spent the previous evening planning my public humiliation with clinical detachment, and now he was asking about lunch plans like a normal brother making normal family arrangements. I stared at the message for several minutes before typing my response, not feeling well today. Need some rest before the big dinner. It wasn't entirely a lie, and it bought me time to finalize my decision about how to respond to their planned intervention. The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. I researched legal protections for my trust fund, confirmed my photography equipment was properly insured, and began mentally preparing for the possibility that this Christmas might be my last as a member of the Westfield family. That evening, I heard my car being moved to the garage, exactly as they had planned. The sound of my own vehicle being relocated without my permission felt like a violation that confirmed everything I had overheard. They weren't even waiting until after their dinner presentation to begin implementing their control strategies. I lay awake most of that night, cycling between anger, grief, and a strange sense of clarity that was slowly emerging from the emotional chaos. By dawn, I had reached a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. I would not be attending their Christmas Eve dinner. I would not be participating in my own humiliation. I would not be giving them the opportunity to present my life choices as evidence of mental illness or family failure. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to choose my own well-being over their approval. The realization didn't immediately erase 26 years of conditioning, but it created a foundation of self-respect that I could build upon. I deserved better than what they were planning. I deserved to be treated as a capable adult whose decisions might be different from theirs but were no less valid. I deserved a family that could love me for who I actually was, not who they needed me to be for their own comfort. The grief of accepting that my biological family might never be able to provide that kind of love was overwhelming, but it was also the beginning of my emotional freedom. I was finally ready to stop trying to earn something that should have been given unconditionally from the beginning. The morning of December 23rd, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Instead of the paralyzing anxiety that had consumed me since overhearing their plans, I felt focused and determined. For the first time in my adult life, I was going to respond strategically rather than emotionally to my family's manipulation. I spent the early hours creating a detailed action plan, breaking down my response into manageable steps that would protect my interests while maintaining my dignity. This wasn't about revenge or proving a point, it was about establishing boundaries and demonstrating that I was capable of the kind of strategic thinking they claimed I lacked. Step 1 was securing my financial independence. I called my grandfather's estate lawyer, Mr. Davidson, who had administered my trust fund since I turned 18. His office was closed for the holidays, but he returned my urgent voicemail within 2 hours. "Natalie, how can I help you?" he asked, his voice carrying the warm professionalism that had made him my grandfather's most trusted advisor. I explained the situation carefully, focusing on the legal facts rather than the emotional details. My family was threatening to revoke access to my trust fund based on disagreement with my career choice, and I needed to understand my rights and protections. "They cannot legally restrict your access to those funds," Mr. Davidson confirmed immediately. "Your grandfather's will was very specific about the conditions for trust fund distribution. Career choice is not mentioned as a restriction factor. However, I recommend transferring the funds to an account at a different bank, one where your parents don't have any business relationships." Within an hour, I had established accounts at a credit union across town and initiated the transfer process. The sense of security that came from protecting my financial foundation was enormous. Whatever happened with my family, I would not be economically vulnerable to their control tactics. Step 2 involved documenting my business success in ways that would be difficult for them to dismiss or distort. I spent the afternoon preparing a comprehensive portfolio that demonstrated the growth and professionalism of my photography career. Client testimonials, revenue charts, published features, and upcoming contracts were organized into a presentation that clearly showed this was a legitimate business, not a hobby. I also contacted my 3 biggest clients to request written recommendations that specifically addressed my professionalism, reliability, and artistic skill. These documents would serve as evidence if my family attempted to publicly question my competence or mental stability. Step 3 required the most emotional strength, crafting personalized letters to each family member that would accompany the Christmas gifts I had created for them. These letters needed to establish clear boundaries about acceptable behavior while leaving the door open for future relationship repair if they chose to respect my autonomy. The letter to my parents was the most difficult to write. I went through 7 drafts before finding the right balance of firmness and love. "I know you believe your concerns about my career come from a place of caring, but the approach you've chosen has damaged our relationship in ways that may be irreparable. I am a capable adult who has built a successful business doing work that brings me fulfillment and serves my clients well. I deserve your respect for that choice, even if you would have made different decisions. Your love should not be conditional on my willingness to live the life you planned for me rather than the life I've chosen for myself." The letter to Jonathan was more direct, addressing his willingness to pathologize my career choice. "Your participation in planning a psychological intervention without my knowledge or consent has fundamentally changed how I view our relationship. As someone trained in legal ethics, you should understand the importance of informed consent and due process. Applying those principles to family relationships means respecting my right to make decisions about my own life, even when you disagree with those decisions." Step 4 involved arranging alternative Christmas plans that would demonstrate my ability to create meaningful celebrations without my family's involvement. I contacted my college roommate, Sarah, who had moved to Portland after graduation to work for an environmental nonprofit. She immediately invited me to spend Christmas with her chosen family of fellow activists and artists. "We're having a completely non-traditional celebration," she explained enthusiastically. "Everyone brings something they've created during the year to share, and we spend the day supporting each other's projects and dreams. It sounds like exactly what you need right now." The contrast between her invitation and my family's planned intervention was stark. Sarah's friends wanted to celebrate my artistic achievements, while my family wanted to eliminate them. The choice between these two environments suddenly seemed obvious. Step 5 required coordination with Carmen, who had become an unexpected ally in this situation. When I explained that I needed to retrieve some personal items without my family's knowledge, she offered to help without asking for detailed explanations. "Miss Natalie, I've worked for this family long enough to understand when someone needs support," she said quietly. "Your parents are planning something that doesn't feel right to me. Whatever you need to do to protect yourself, I'll help however I can." With Carmen's assistance, I was able to collect my most important belongings, journals, photographs, and the portfolio negatives that represented 3 years of professional work. These items would have been vulnerable during the bedroom clearing they had planned, and losing them would have damaged both my business and my personal history. Step 6 was the most challenging, preparing for the inevitable confrontation when my family discovered my absence from Christmas Eve dinner. I drafted responses to the arguments they would likely make, practicing ways to remain calm and assertive when they attempted to guilt, threaten, or manipulate me into compliance. I also researched local hotels where I could stay if returning to the family home became impossible. Having backup housing options reduced my anxiety about the potential consequences of my decision. The final element of my plan involved timing my departure to maximize the impact of my absence while minimizing opportunities for them to intervene. I would leave early on Christmas Eve morning, before the household became busy with dinner preparations. By the time they realized I was gone, I would be safely in Portland with Sarah. That evening, I completed my packing with methodical precision. Photography equipment, business documents, and personal belongings were organized efficiently in my car. The gifts for my family members, each accompanied by its carefully written letter, were arranged on my dresser where they would be discovered after my departure. As I worked, I felt a strange combination of grief and liberation. I was mourning the family relationships I had always wanted but never actually had, while simultaneously celebrating my newfound freedom to define success and happiness on my own terms. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my room, followed by a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Uncle Marcus, looking uncomfortable but determined. "Natalie, can we talk for a few minutes?" he asked quietly. I invited him in, uncertain whether he was there to persuade me to attend the dinner or to offer support. He sat in my desk chair and looked around at the packed bags with obvious understanding. "You know about tomorrow's dinner plans," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak without revealing how much I had overheard. "I want you to know that not everyone in this family agrees with that approach," he continued. "Your grandmother and I have both expressed serious concerns about the intervention strategy, but your parents are convinced it's necessary." His validation meant more than I had expected. Knowing that some family members recognized the inappropriateness of the planned dinner gave me confidence that my reaction wasn't an overresponse. "What they're planning isn't about helping you," Uncle Marcus said carefully. "It's about maintaining control over a narrative that makes them comfortable. Your success as a photographer challenges their assumptions about acceptable career paths, and they're responding with fear rather than pride." He stood to leave, then turned back with a sad smile. "Your grandfather would have been proud of your entrepreneurial spirit and artistic talent. He understood that different kinds of intelligence require different kinds of careers. I hope you remember that, whatever happens tomorrow." After he left, I finished my preparations with renewed certainty that I was making the right choice. I set my alarm for dawn and tried to get some sleep before the most difficult day of my adult life. As I lay in my childhood bed for what might be the last time, I thought about the courage required to choose authenticity over approval. My family had taught me to value their opinion above my own judgment, but I was finally ready to trust my own assessment of what would make my life meaningful and fulfilling. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of building relationships based on mutual respect rather than conditional acceptance. It wouldn't be easy, but it would be honest in ways my family relationships had never been. I left the Westfield estate at 6:30 a.m. on Christmas Eve, loading my car in the pre-dawn darkness while the house remained silent. The drive to Portland would take 8 hours, and I wanted to be well beyond reach before my family discovered my absence. As I pulled out of the driveway for what might be the final time, I felt a mixture of grief and relief that was almost overwhelming. The first few hours of driving passed in a blur of familiar highways and complicated emotions. I had my phone set to silent, knowing that calls would begin once my absence was discovered. Around 10 a.m., I stopped for gas and coffee at a rest area outside Albany and checked my messages. 12 missed calls and 17 text messages had accumulated in just 2 hours. The progression of messages told the story of my family's growing panic and anger. It started with my mother's politely concerned inquiry. "Natalie, Carmen said your bed wasn't slept in. Please call when you get this message." Within an hour, the tone had shifted significantly. "Where are you? This is completely unacceptable behavior. Call immediately." Jonathan's messages were more direct. "Mom is having a meltdown. Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Come home before this gets worse." His follow-up 30 minutes later was harsher. "Your selfishness is ruining Christmas for everyone. Grandmother flew in from Boston specifically to see you." My father's single text was characteristically authoritative. "You will return home immediately or face serious consequences regarding your trust fund and living arrangements. This discussion is not negotiable." I decided to answer one call to establish my boundaries clearly before continuing the drive. My mother was the next caller, and I picked up on the second ring. "Natalie Elizabeth Westfield, where are you?" Her voice was tight with controlled fury. "The entire family is here. Guests are arriving in 4 hours. This behavior is absolutely inexcusable." "I'm not coming to dinner, Mother," I said calmly, pulling over to focus entirely on the conversation. "I know about the intervention you planned. I know about Dr. Harrison, the job offer from Mr. Pemberton, and your arrangement to clear out my bedroom while I sat through your public humiliation." The silence on the other end lasted so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. "You were eavesdropping on private family discussions. That's a violation of trust that confirms our concerns about your judgment and mental state." The speed with which she turned my discovery of their plot into evidence of my psychological problems was breathtaking. They had planned to ambush me without my knowledge or consent, but my learning about it somehow became the real transgression. "There's nothing wrong with my mental state," I replied firmly. "There's something wrong with a family that would plan to publicly humiliate their daughter rather than respect her right to make her own career choices. We are trying to help you avoid a financial disaster," my mother said, her voice rising. "Photography is not a stable career. You're living in a fantasy that will eventually collapse, and we won't be able to support you when that happens." "I've been financially independent for 3 years," I pointed out. "My business is growing, my clients are satisfied, and I'm building something meaningful. The only financial threat I'm facing is from you threatening to cut off my trust fund because you disagree with my choices. That trust fund was intended to support your education and early career development," she shot back. "Wasting it on photography equipment and studio rent is not what your grandfather intended. This was a complete fabrication. My grandfather's will had been very specific about allowing me to use the funds for any legitimate business development, and photography equipment clearly qualified. But my mother was rewriting history to justify their control tactics." "Mr. Davidson disagrees with your interpretation of the will," I said. "The trust fund is legally mine to use for business development, and my photography career qualifies under those terms." Another long silence followed. I could hear voices in the background, suggesting that other family members were listening to her side of the conversation and offering input. "Your father wants to speak with you," she said finally. "Natalie, this has gone far enough," my father's voice boomed through the phone with courtroom authority. "You will return home immediately and participate in this family celebration like a responsible adult. Your behavior is embarrassing and childish. What's embarrassing is planning to have a psychiatrist diagnose me with mental illness in front of dinner guests because you can't accept that I'm successful doing something you didn't choose for me," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice remained. "Dr. Harrison is a family friend who is concerned about your well-being," my father said, but I could hear the defensiveness creeping into his tone. "His professional opinion is that your rejection of family guidance and pursuit of an unstable career suggests underlying emotional issues that need to be addressed. His professional opinion is based on information you provided, not on any actual interaction with me," I pointed out. You've constructed a narrative of mental illness to explain away my career choice because you can't accept that I might know what's best for my own life. You're 26 years old with no real-world experience, my father continued. You have no understanding of the financial realities of adult life or the importance of building long-term security. We've indulged this photography hobby long enough, but it's time for you to get serious about your future. The conversation was following exactly the script I had expected, with every point I made being dismissed as evidence of my immaturity or poor judgment. They weren't actually listening to anything I said, they were simply waiting for their turn to repeat the same arguments about financial security and family expectations. I'm ending this conversation, I said finally. I'll be spending Christmas with people who respect my choices and celebrate my achievements instead of trying to eliminate them. If you don't come home, there will be consequences, my father warned. We will not continue enabling this destructive behavior. The only destructive behavior I see is a family that would rather lose a daughter than admit they were wrong about what success looks like, I replied. Your gifts will be delivered this afternoon with letters explaining my boundaries for any future relationship. Whether you choose to respect those boundaries is up to you. I ended the call and sat in my car for several minutes, shaking from the adrenaline of finally confronting them directly. The conversation had confirmed everything I had suspected about their motivations and methods. They weren't concerned about my well-being, they were concerned about maintaining control over my narrative. The remaining drive to Portland passed more peacefully. I turned my phone to airplane mode to avoid additional calls and focused on the changing landscape outside my windows. With each mile that separated me from Riverside Heights, I felt lighter and more certain that I had made the right choice. Sarah's apartment was in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, surrounded by galleries, independent bookstores, and the kind of creative businesses that my family would dismiss as impractical. When she answered the door, her first words were, "You look like someone who just escaped from prison." That's actually a pretty accurate description, I said, and we both started laughing. The chosen family gathering that evening was everything my family's Christmas celebration was not. 8 people ranging in age from 23 to 62 had come together to share food, stories, and creative projects. There was a musician who performed original songs, an environmental scientist who shared photographs from her research in Costa Rica, and a social worker who had started a nonprofit for homeless youth. When Sarah introduced me as a photographer who had just launched her own business, the group responded with genuine interest and enthusiasm. They asked thoughtful questions about my artistic vision, my business model, and my future goals. No one questioned whether photography was a legitimate career or suggested that I should pursue something more conventional. The contrast to my family's dismissive attitude was stark and healing. These people celebrated creative risk-taking and entrepreneurial spirit instead of fearing it. They understood that meaningful work often requires choosing passion over security, authenticity over approval. Around 9 p.m., I turned my phone back on to discover 43 missed calls and 61 text messages. The messages ranged from my family's continued demands that I return home to updates from Uncle Marcus about the dinner's awkward aftermath. Your absence created quite a scene, Uncle Marcus had texted. Your mother had to explain to guests why you weren't here. The intervention plan fell apart without a target. Several people asked uncomfortable questions about the family dynamics when they realized you had deliberately avoided attending. Another message from him provided more details. Dr. Harrison left early after asking why he had been invited to diagnose someone who wasn't present. Judge Harrison made some pointed comments about the importance of respecting adult children's autonomy. Your grandmother is furious with your parents for driving you away. The gift delivery service had completed their assignment, and according to Uncle Marcus, my personalized letters had created additional drama. Your letter to your parents was read aloud during dessert, he reported. It sparked a significant argument about family expectations and manipulation tactics. Several guests expressed support for your position. The final message from Uncle Marcus was the most encouraging. Your grandmother wants your contact information. She says she's proud of your business success and wants to support your photography career. She also said some choice words about your parents' handling of this situation that I can't repeat in a text message. As I read through the updates, I realized that my absence had accomplished something I never could have achieved by attending their intervention dinner. By refusing to participate in my own humiliation, I had forced them to reveal their true motivations to an audience of family friends and community leaders. The ugly dynamics they had kept hidden behind closed doors were now exposed for everyone to see. My family's perfect Christmas celebration had imploded not because I was there to cause problems, but because I wasn't there to absorb their dysfunction quietly. Without me as a target for their intervention, they had been forced to confront the embarrassing reality of what they had planned to do. For the first time in my adult life, I had chosen my own well-being over their comfort, and the consequences were falling on them rather than me. It felt like a fundamental shift in power dynamics that had been years in the making. I fell asleep that night on Sarah's couch, surrounded by people who had spent the evening celebrating my courage rather than questioning my choices. The contrast to how I would have felt after enduring my family's intervention dinner was profound. I had chosen authenticity over approval, and for the first time, that choice felt like freedom rather than loss. The week following Christmas brought a series of unexpected developments that fundamentally altered the landscape of my family relationships. While I remained in Portland with Sarah, processing the emotional aftermath of my decision, the ripple effects of my absence continued to unfold back in Riverside Heights. The first surprise came from my grandmother, Eleanor Westfield, who had apparently spent Christmas Day interrogating my parents about their treatment of my photography career. Uncle Marcus relayed the details in a long phone call that left me both amused and touched by her fierce advocacy. "Your grandmother demanded to see examples of your work," he explained. "When your mother tried to dismiss it as hobby-level photography, Eleanor insisted on looking at your website and client testimonials. She spent an hour examining every portfolio piece and reading customer reviews." The image of my 83-year-old grandmother carefully reviewing my online presence while my parents squirmed was both satisfying and heartwarming. Eleanor had built her own successful interior design business in the 1960s when women entrepreneurs were rare, and she apparently recognized genuine talent and business acumen when she saw it. "She told your parents in front of everyone that they were fools for failing to support such obvious artistic and commercial success," Uncle Marcus continued. "Then she announced that she would be commissioning a series of family portraits from you for her Boston home and recommended your services to 3 other families at the dinner. This endorsement from the family matriarch carried significant weight in our social circle. Eleanor's opinion on aesthetic matters was highly respected, and her public support for my work would be difficult for my parents to counteract without appearing to contradict their own mother." The second unexpected development came from Jonathan, who called me directly 3 days after Christmas. His tone was notably different from his angry text messages during my escape to Portland. "I owe you an apology," he began without preamble. "I spent the past few days thinking about the intervention we planned, and I realize how inappropriate and controlling it was." I remained silent, uncertain whether this was genuine remorse or another manipulation tactic designed to bring me back into compliance. "Seeing your empty chair at dinner and watching Mom try to explain your absence to confused guests made me understand how this must have looked from your perspective," he continued. "We weren't planning to help you. We were planning to publicly shame you into submission." His admission carried the same analytical tone he used when dissecting legal cases, suggesting he had applied his professional objectivity to our family dynamics and found them lacking. "I also looked at your business website and social media presence," Jonathan added. "Your revenue streams are more diversified than I realized, and your client base is genuinely impressive. I was wrong to assume this was just an expensive hobby." This acknowledgement of my professional competence felt significant coming from the family member whose opinion had always carried the most weight with our parents. Jonathan's legal training made him naturally skeptical of emotional arguments, so his fact-based assessment of my business success might influence family discussions in ways that my own protests never could. "Does this mean you'll talk to Mom and Dad about treating my career with more respect?" I asked. "I've already started," he replied. "I told them that threatening to revoke your trust fund was legally questionable and ethically wrong. I also pointed out that their approach was driving you away permanently when a more supportive stance might have maintained family relationships while respecting your autonomy." The conversation with Jonathan lasted over an hour, covering not just my immediate situation but broader patterns of family control and expectation that had affected all of us in different ways. He admitted that his own career choice had been influenced by fear of disappointing our parents rather than genuine passion for law, and he envied my courage to pursue authentic fulfillment over conventional security. The third major shift came from an unexpected source, my father's law partner, Mr. Pemberton, who had been present at the disastrous Christmas dinner. He reached out through Uncle Marcus to request a meeting about potential business collaboration. He was impressed by the family portrait work shown in your portfolio, Uncle Marcus explained. His daughter is getting married next spring, and he wants to discuss hiring you for the wedding photography. He also mentioned that several clients have been asking his firm for recommendations for corporate headshot photographers. This potential business opportunity from within my family's professional network was particularly meaningful because it represented validation from people who understood commercial viability and quality standards. If my father's law partner was willing to trust me with his daughter's wedding photography, it would be difficult for my parents to continue characterizing my work as amateur or unreliable. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents remained strained but was slowly evolving. My mother's attempts to contact me had shifted from angry demands to awkward overtures that suggested she was struggling to process the changed power dynamics between us. "I want you to know that we never intended to hurt you," she said during our first conversation after New Year's Day. "Everything we did was motivated by love and concern for your future security." "Loving parents don't plan public interventions designed to humiliate their children," I replied calmly. "Concerned parents have honest conversations about their worries instead of coordinating with outsiders to override their adult child's autonomy." The conversation was difficult but felt different from our previous confrontations. For the first time, my mother seemed to be actually listening to my perspective rather than simply waiting for her turn to present counterarguments. "Your grandmother thinks we handled this situation poorly," she admitted reluctantly. "She says we're in danger of losing you permanently over something that could have been resolved through better communication." This acknowledgement that their approach had been problematic was the closest thing to an apology I had received from either parent. It wasn't a full acceptance of responsibility, but it represented progress toward recognizing that my reactions weren't unreasonable or oversensitive. My father's response was more complex and contradictory. He had apparently spent considerable time researching the photography industry and had discovered that successful photographers could indeed earn substantial incomes and build sustainable businesses. This factual information seemed to carry more weight with him than any emotional appeals about artistic fulfillment or personal happiness. "I may have underestimated the commercial viability of professional photography," he told me during a stiff but civil phone conversation. "Your business model appears more sophisticated than I initially understood." This wasn't exactly an enthusiastic endorsement of my career choice, but it represented a significant shift from his previous dismissal of photography as an impractical hobby. His legalistic mind seemed capable of accepting evidence that contradicted his preconceptions, even when that evidence challenged his assumptions about appropriate career paths. The most encouraging development was the gradual strengthening of relationships with extended family members who had been present for the Christmas dinner debacle. Several cousins reached out to express support for my decision to prioritize my well-being over family approval. 2 aunts commissioned portrait sessions for their own families, and my great-uncle offered to introduce me to his business associates who might need corporate photography services. These family members had apparently been uncomfortable with my parents' controlling behavior for years but had never felt able to intervene directly. My public refusal to participate in their intervention had given others permission to express support for my autonomy and question the family's toxic dynamics. The professional consequences of my stand were overwhelmingly positive. Word about my business had spread through my family's social network, generating inquiries from potential clients who valued quality work and professional integrity. The controversy surrounding my Christmas absence had actually increased interest in my photography services rather than damaging my reputation. By mid-January, I had booked 3 weddings, 2 corporate projects, and several family portrait sessions through referrals that traced back to my grandmother's advocacy and Mr. Pemberton's endorsement. The financial security that my parents had claimed to be protecting was actually enhanced by my refusal to compromise my professional integrity. Living in Portland for an extended period also provided perspective on what healthy family relationships could look like. Sarah's chosen family included people who disagreed with each other's choices but supported each other's right to make those choices. They offered advice when asked but respected boundaries when declined. They celebrated each other's successes without requiring those successes to conform to predetermined definitions. The contrast to my biological family's conditional acceptance was striking and educational. I began to understand that love and support didn't require agreement or approval. Healthy relationships were built on respect for each person's autonomy rather than conformity to group expectations. As February approached, I faced the decision of whether to return to Riverside Heights or establish permanent residence in Portland. My business could operate from either location, but the choice represented a deeper question about how much geographic and emotional distance I needed from my family to maintain my own well-being. The past month had demonstrated that standing up to toxic family dynamics could create positive change, but it had also revealed the ongoing work required to maintain healthy boundaries with people who had spent decades practicing manipulative behaviors. I was no longer the same person who had fled my childhood home on Christmas Eve. I had discovered strengths I didn't know I possessed and learned to trust my own judgment about what constituted success and fulfillment. Whether my family would ultimately be able to accept this evolved version of myself remained an open question, but I was finally prepared to prioritize my own growth over their comfort. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.